Hello and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Zoe Hawkins, and my friend and co-host Jo Wheatley.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's episode. We know you love us talking through a coaching demo, so that's what we're going to do for you today. Today's session is focused on perceptual positions, and we're going to talk you through an activity you can use around this that comes from neurolinguistic programming. And we'll also talk about how you can use the principles of it in your coaching practice so that you're not dependent on a coaching activity, because we know some of you don't really like structures or semi-structures, but you want to take the principles, and some of you really love to have the kind of scaffolding of a coaching activity. So I hope you enjoy the discussion today.
Absolutely. And I think if we just start by putting this in context, like when would you use a perceptual positions activity? And these sorts of activities are really good for generating different perspectives and options. So they can be great to use with a client when they're a little bit stuck, or perhaps when a client is a little bit resistant to challenge from others, so it's a great way to overcome resistance, because the way you're still using perceptual positions, as you'll find out in a moment, is that you're accessing the client's voice, but in doing so in a way where they almost feel and think like they're accessing somebody else's voice. So it's a great way to get the wisdom from deep within themselves by taking them outside of themselves in some ways. So that's a little teaser into how you would use it. So, Jo, do you want to talk through the activity that you've got in mind?
Yeah, I would just build on what you said there, which is if you've got a client that has maybe a little bit low self-esteem, is perhaps what we would call a bit more externally referenced. So, values the opinions of others perhaps more than their own at the point when you're kind of starting to coach them. And that might be a theme you work on in your coaching. What Zoe is saying is where they feel that they are accessing and there's validity to what they're perceiving to be other people's perspectives, it can make it more accessible. And then through the conversation, you can kind of talk about how actually that is their own inner coach voices, if you like, their own perspective. So there's lots of different ways that you can do it. But one way that you can do it is that you can ask the individual, your client, to identify three different categories. So mentor, friend,
And hero.
mentor, friend, and hero. So each of those three have three different lenses. So you'll ask them to identify a past hero, a present hero, and a future hero, and a past friend, future friend, past mentor, current mentor, and future mentor. Now, people often get stuck with the future one. They're like, what does it mean? Like like a future hero. It can mean whatever the client wants it to mean, of course, in the truest coaching sense. But for those that need a little bit more of a prompt, it can be just, it might be about imagining their ideal future. So in the ideal future, who would be a, a hero that that they would like to have. And it really doesn't matter, it could be somebody that doesn't even exist, that they start to build out in their mind. It really is, go back to the purpose of the activity, which is to help them connect to the inner wisdom that they have within themselves, so you can get creative together. And you can, of course, sit and have a chat in the virtual world like many of us do as coaches with our clients. So it can be a sat down conversation. But it can also be an activity where you invite the client to get up and out of their seat. So if you are working with a client that works very well with visuals, or the movement of the body, and it helps them also to kind of release some of that wisdom in the body, you can invite them to get up. You can invite them to create labels for each of these. So you'd have 9 labels. You've got 3 lots of hero, 3 lots of friend, 3 lots of mentor, and you'd invite them to put those people in a circle, and then also a label for themselves, and that label would go in the center of the circle. Okay, so you've got you in the middle, or there's a client, and then in a circle around that, you've got all of those perspectives. And you'll invite the client to identify, like, what is it that they would like help, support, or wisdom from the others on. So you're going to help them to form what we would class as a well-formed kind of request or statement. And then you'll invite them to choose in turn who they would like to listen to. So they stand on the you if they're doing it as a physical activity, and they would ask the question. They'd say, I'd like to hear from John, let's say, my past mentor. And so they would go and step into or onto that label, looking back at the place they've just come from. So as if they're speaking to themselves. And you'll just be silent as the coach. You're bearing witness. You're creating the kind of energetic space where they feel able to really kind of tap into that. And they will say whatever they say. And they may or may not be able to remember that. Some people will share something and they will have a physiological response to it. It's like, where did that come from? Like they surprise themselves and they can feel a shift happening. And when they step into some of the other kind of personas, there might not be anything new. They might not have such a strong reaction. And when they've finished going around, so once they've kind of fed back from that person, they step back into the middle, looking back at the place that they've just heard from, and they will thank that person for sharing that. And they'll go around. You'll do that with all of the different 9 perspectives, and then you'll debrief with the client around the learning.
And I think something that is an important subtlety in the way that you work with this is that when they are in the persona of the other person, they are speaking from that persona and not themselves. So they wouldn't say, what John would advise me would be, like they are John. So they would be talking to the you. So, let's say it's Bob, Bob, what I would advise you do in this situation is, or Bob, what I would extend to you, is some self-compassion, so they are talking from that persona. And that is the place where, as the coach, if you hear them not doing that, just to gently reorientate them and invite them to really step into that persona. Some clients might find that a bit awkward, but that's really where you get the wisdom from. Because if they're talking from themselves, they're still in the perspective of themselves. They're not actually in the other position or the other perspective.
And another way to phrase that, I think, is they're kind of stuck in their conscious mind if they're doing that. And actually, the purpose of this activity is to enable the client to access their unconscious mind, which is where their emotions are stored, for example, where their memories are stored. There's a lot of stuff stored in there. So there is some prep work to do before you would go into this activity. Of course, you talk to your client, you'd be exploring with them around, like, what is the challenge that they're experiencing? Where are they getting stuck? What would be helpful to them in order to achieve whatever their goal is? And if what part of what they've come to coaching for is to gain some new perspectives, you may offer this as an opportunity, an option of something that you could do together. And you might give them an overview of it. And if they feel it's something that could be beneficial, then you agree to experiment together. It may be useful to just test out with them before you start the activity, like their ability to be able to access other voices, other perspectives, so that the activity can flow a bit more, because some people just may not find that possible to do, or there might be some more prep and things that you need to do before that activity would be really, really helpful.
And you were in flow when you were talking around the activity and the labels, but one of the things I wanted to add in there is those labels, so that future hero, future mentor, future friend, or even past, present, current, they don't have to be real people. They could be cartoon characters or superheroes, or like you can get fun and light and creative with this as well. Because I think sometimes, bringing an element of humor or foolishness to coaching, that's another perspective. That is another part of themselves that they can step into. So if you're working with someone and they're like, oh, my future hero is going to be Wonder Woman, brilliant. Like, step into the persona of Wonder Woman. What a powerful perspective to step into in order to give yourself wisdom and guidance. And that's an extension of this concept, if you like. So Joe's sort of articulated one way of doing it. Another way might be to think about, what are all the parts of themselves that they already have or want to have. So you might do a similar setup, and instead of having like past, present, future, hero, mentor, friend, you might have like powerful me, confident me, assertive me, compassionate me, vulnerable me, like relevant to whatever the client's challenge is. You can access all these different sort of parts of themselves, and they can step into the perspective, okay, so what would vulnerable you have to offer you in terms of the wisdom and guidance related to your goal or inquiry? And that might be where they really tap into, I need to ask for help, or I need to give myself compassion. And what might the powerful me say, or the powerful me might say, um, remember who you are. Like, remember your ancestors and everything that they have had to overcome just to allow you to be here, and tap into that energy and that power. So, that's another extension of how you can create a similar activity. And I think what we're saying is like, that's the concept of positions and perspectives and the way to tap into the unconscious mind. Now go and be creative and think about how you can incorporate and embed this into your own coaching conversations in a way that feels aligned for you.
Well, so far we've been talking about what you can facilitate, like in a practical sense, or invite your client to do to help them to tap into their different perceptual positions. But another lens on this is about how can you use these principles thinking about how you show up as a coach? What parts of you are you bringing into the session with a particular client? Are there bits of you that, if you really were to search inside, are shut down with particular clients, or because of particular things maybe that are happening in your life? Is there some wisdom in you that you can't quite access, but is there? How could you use some of these principles to really grow and develop as a coach, and to really flex and grow and develop as a coach?
Mm. Another thing that many people would have heard of, I think, around this concept of perceptual persistence, like the empty chair.
Mm.
So that's another extension, a similar thing. So that's where you have your client, and obviously you have your coach, and you together are talking about a particular challenge. And it's usually where a client introduces a third party into the relationship. So let's say it's a conflict situation with their line manager. You can ask the client to take the seat of the line manager, and talk from their perspective about the conflict that is taking place. And the empty chair is almost like the meta view, so as you look down on this that is happening between the line manager and, Sophie, so talk about the person as if with their name. What do you see when you look down upon these two people? So again, you're taking them out of themselves and out of their own perspective into a meta position, being able to look down upon it. And that's another perspective that can give your client access to new resources, new options, new wisdom that they haven't had before. You could invite them to take your chair, step into my chair as the coach. What questions would you be asking yourself here? What do you see from the perspective of the coach based on what you've just heard? You can have some fun, I think, with these concepts.
Even questions, I think, that are open, like, what perspective would you like to have? What perspective have you not yet considered? And as you were saying earlier, Zoe, like bringing in some more of the creative visual things, like draw the perspective. What is there in your room that represents a perspective or a lens that you would like to engage in to explore this in a new way today? And even if you go back to the perceptual positions, we were talking earlier about like friend, hero, mentor, it doesn't have to be those three labels. Like if they like the idea of having some semi-structure, they might say, oh, I don't know, I don't really got any heroes. It's not really like part of my model of the world. They might come up with a different label that you can see is like, they're owning this now. This really means something. They are already accessing what that means for the client. Brilliant. And you were saying, so like to get playful with it. And even in that discussion, kind of working out what are the labels that would be helpful to them. There's learning available there in that process around, their belief system, their value system. So depending on where you might explore this with the client, it's the conversations around the activities that are often, the most valuable part of it.
You may have mentioned this, but just as you were talking there, well, actually, two things came to mind. But one of the things that came to mind was around neurodiversity. And I think you said, do check out with your client whether they can do this, because this could be a very frustrating activity for somebody who simply isn't able to access other perspectives. So I think you can be adaptive and you can co-create with your client around what will be helpful. But before you, I mean, all coaching activities should be done by invitation anyway, but do talk through what the activity entails before inviting your client into it. Because I know um, certain neurodivergent clients and clients in general, right? Like not everybody finds this easy. So do check out if it's a activity your client would like to do. And then the other thing that came into my mind was a little bit random, but we'll go with the flow on this podcast. Is I can't remember who the astronaut was, the British astronaut that went into space, but I think I heard him say once that when he looked down on the world from space, everything seemed so insignificant. And so I think there's that perspective of like, how far would your client need to zoom out from their challenge or their problem to almost get that release around how insignificant something is in the grand scheme of life and the universe. And that you could do that creatively, you could do that metaphorically, but I think that's another way to bring an element of kind of fun into it.
Yeah, because you might say, oh, if you were to get into a helicopter and go up above, but that might not be powerful enough. Or they might be like, a helicopter, I'd need to get into a rocket. You're like, okay, a rocket. Okay. How big are the engines on this rocket? Like, how far are we going out? What height are we at now? Right. Okay, is there any more in the engines? What about if we go a bit further? Or you might have somebody that's got way more knowledge than we have about these things that can tell us you can go even further in something else. So yeah, and that is about, I think, really having an understanding of matching energy, having an understanding of the client's model of the world, because that's what we're working with really in these spaces. So hopefully there's some food for thought in today's episode. If you are interested in learning more about different coaching tools, models, and techniques, check out our coaching qualifications accredited with the coaching bodies, and you can find out about those at www.igcompany.co.uk.